the WGU Cloud degree. We're going to go over the AWS versus Azure and the multi-track pathways that you have when you choose this degree, and we're going to see which one's right for you. Okay, so the whole idea of this video is really just to help you decide or just get some insights if you're considering the cloud degree at all. So the overview for this video is pretty much just going to be, we're going to go over the curriculum of the cloud degree and break down the certifications, pretty much the differences between all the tracks, all three, and then we have the job role and market breakdown, kind of just explaining AWS and Azure and what that looks like in the real world when you're applying for roles, and then who should choose what, how to decide, and then my recommendation, of course. So without further ado, let's get started. So first things first, this is the curriculum. You have a total of 38 classes. So this portion here, I'm not going to go over this because it's going to be a really long video, but I'll leave enough time for you to pause the video and so you can actually look. But I'll give a general explanation first, and this is the Gen Ed here. So a lot of these could be transferred in if you had a 2-year degree, or if you did a lot of courses outside of WGU, like for college credits like study.com or Sophia Learning, stuff like that. You could transfer these in relatively easily. So the next thing we have is the IT classes, and the reason I broke it up like this is IT classes and core classes is because the IT classes, these classes here, are found in the WGU IT degree, so a lot of these will look very familiar. And as you can see, you'll get quite a few certs, so like the CompTIA Plus, Network Plus, CompTIA Security Plus, Project Plus, ITIL, and Linux Essentials from LPI. All those, you get that in the regular IT degree. So the difference being here, the core classes, these core classes here are specific to the cloud degree specifically. So you'll have CompTIA Cloud Plus is the other certification, but across the 3 tracks, they're the same. So regardless of which one you choose, these right here will stay the same. The only difference between the foundational, the AWS, we'll call it multi-cloud, but it is called technically the foundational, I guess, and the Azure is this. So here I drew out the differences between the 3 as far as certificates, because that's the only difference, is certificates. And as you can see, I have arrows going across all 3 because in the AWS track, you have the Azure Fundamentals certification, and you get it across all three tracks. So here you can see on the left side here that AWS, you get the the AWS Certified Cloud Practitioner. This one's a very common one that you see everywhere, and a lot of people feel like they can get jobs with just that. And that used to be the case years ago, but nowadays, honestly, certifications are kind of like a bare minimum almost. But they're not going to equate to a job, so to speak. We'll get into that a little bit later. So you have the Certified Solutions Architect Associate. As far as when you apply to jobs, this one right here is going to be the most sought after, aside from maybe the Developer Associate. But as you can see here, what's unique to the AWS track of the WGU degree is going to be these 2 right here. Okay, so that's the Developer Associate and the SysOps Administrator Associate, with these 2 also being in the foundational core, the track. So, and then as you can see in the foundational, you have 2 other ones. It's kind of split. It's half and half, minus the fundamentals, which is across all 3. You have the Developer Associate and the Administrator Associate, which go obviously in the Azure thing. So as you can see, you got 2 classes unique to AWS and 2 classes or certs unique to Azure. So as far as difficulty is concerned, because you're going a little bit deeper here, the Azure Data Engineer Associate, I'm pretty sure, I actually don't remember. I know this one being the expert level, surely to God it's more difficult, but you're going into a lot more depth here with these 2. And so because there's more depth, it's obviously going to take a little bit more time to learn, and it's a little bit more difficult. And these right here alone are already pretty difficult in and of themselves. So you're just going that layer deeper with those two, versus here in the foundational, you're just going down to the developer associate and administrator associate level, and then the cloud practitioner, which is the same as fundamentals pretty much, but for the AWS. Then you have, as far as like difficult certificates, it's all these three right here. These are the difficult ones. These are pretty easy. And then kind of the same thing with AWS. A lot of people say this one's really, really tough. A lot of people, smart people that know what they're doing, have failed this. And it's just a tough class or course. Not to say that the rest aren't tough. It's just that this one is significantly harder than the rest of these here. So a lot of these are just harder certifications. Like, they take a little bit more time to learn. And so naturally you'll be in the program longer than you would if you weren't going to that level. So for that reason, multi-cloud is going to be like the faster / easier route to get the cloud degree, rather than going through here. The difference being that this is more of a generalizing, and this is going with one of these tracks is going to be specializing. So we'll talk about the differences here in a second, but some important notes to keep track of is that you can change your track halfway through. So like, you can start theoretically with like the multi-cloud path, and then you decide, maybe you get a job halfway through the degree and you're like, hey, I'm actually working with AWS. So you could actually switch halfway through your program and go and get the AWS track instead of the multi-cloud. The only caveat being, I would assume that if you're in your last semester where you actually started some of the classes, or you're supposed to do, like, let's just say like, one of these classes here, if you're doing the foundational, and you want to go to switch to AWS, for example, if you're in the middle of, if you've already started some of these, then they're probably not going to let you, obviously. So they're at the end of the course anyway. So like, after you've done all the core classes and everything, that's pretty much when you have the certs left remaining. So you have quite a bit of time to change your mind. And then the other thing is, do not try to take the cert outside and transfer it during, like, once you've started WGU. You can totally do this before starting WGU, but once you start WGU, they're not going to let you do this. And I know this from firsthand experience, because this Azure Administrator Associate right here, like, I think at the time that class was a bit outdated, and the course material, it was just like a difficult exam, and I was like, I'd rather just go ahead and get the cert and then transfer it in, because I heard of some people doing that. And then I tried pretty hard, actually. I would like email them, and they wouldn't let me do it. They were like, no, like, we don't care that you got the cert and you want to transfer it in for credit. You can't do that. You have to take the in-house exam, and then they give you a voucher to take the real thing anyway. But again, that's just important to note. So don't try to like bypass the in-house exam, so to speak, just by taking the cert. You should just, once you've started, and you can't really transfer anything from the outside in. In all honesty, though, I don't think the extra certs are worth it as someone that has no experience. So like, if you have no IT experience, I would say it's not worth it to go with one of these advanced level, like Azure or AWS focused tracks. Reason being, because you're going pretty deep here with these certifications, and certifications alone are not going to land you a job. Like, projects are the ones that are going to get you ahead. Or doing project hands-on, having like a foundational level is going to be way more valuable than having like a bunch of theoretical knowledge and not a lot of hands-on. So I would say like going through the program quickly, and then spending the rest of the time outside of the program just working on projects, in your hands dirty, and making sure you have like experience, building your own experience so you can actually talk about it in like an interview. That's going to be far more valuable than like having this specialized niche knowledge in like more advanced certifications. So that's my take on that. So let's just talk about the job role market and breakdown now. As some of you may be aware already, the market share of leading cloud providers, and this is late 2024 data, is 31% market share on AWS, 21% Azure, and then 12% Google. So as you can tell, like AWS is obviously leading the space, but Azure has been catching up as of late. And what does this really mean, right? All it means is that it's just being adopted more. So you're likely going to run into a lot more AWS jobs when you're applying rather than Azure jobs. And but let's just get into like understanding the differences between Azure and AWS, right? So if we look into Azure here, Azure has strong hybrid cloud capabilities. So this just means like the integration between like on-premises infrastructure and cloud. So it's often more geared towards Active Directory based organizations that are moving to the cloud. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, this is pretty much just like saying like whenever you sign into an account at school, on like a Windows computer, and it has your name, you have a username, login, all that stuff. Oftentimes that is being controlled by Active Directory. So that's the market that Azure wins because there's like a seamless integration with Microsoft's ecosystem. So again, like I mentioned, Windows, Office 365, Intune. There's a lot of things that just seamlessly like mesh together, like the single sign-on stuff where you can use like, like your email to sign into different applications that can be easily set up. And it's just very, very convenient for specifically especially like enterprises and stuff that just already use Windows and Microsoft as their environment. It's really easy for them to like mesh well together. So in the job market as well, like more people are aiming towards AWS, so you might be a better candidate for an Azure job just because not everybody's looking into getting into Azure because AWS has so much hype behind it. But that's just kind of like a theory. That's not necessarily like fact, right? Multi-cloud environments. So some companies utilize both cloud environments. One of these reasons could be like flexibility and risk mitigation. So they want to avoid getting vendor lock-in where they're like stuck with a vendor because all their stuff is there, and then the vendor does make some changes or raises prices or whatever, and you're just kind of like you're stuck because so much of your stuff is hosted there that moving it would be a pain. Like optimizing costs and continuity during outages. This is just kind of like saying like, hey, if I have two cloud providers, I can be aware of where I can cut costs because one service is cheaper than the other in certain areas, or something happens to my Azure stuff, I have like backup infrastructure with AWS, or these are just examples, right? But that's probably those are some reasons why companies might want to utilize both cloud environments. Now with the AWS side of things, AWS is more cloud centric. They're not really boasting their hybrid cloud environments. So you'll see a lot more development and DevOps roles whenever you look up like AWS jobs. And that's mainly because a cloud-centric company typically tends to be a tech company. So like software is their product. So that's not the only thing, of course, because cloud is very broad. But a lot of AWS is also known for a lot of frequent new services and features. So this is desired by forward-moving companies that always need like the newest, latest, and greatest, especially like with AI and stuff. Like you see all these new implementations. So AWS is always like releasing new features, and they're known for that. So a lot of companies like that. And again, so like largest global network of data centers. So companies that need to serve like a worldwide audience, for example, can do so with like low latency and high availability, just because there's so many more data centers that can provide things like content distribution networks and stuff like that. And then the other thing too, this would be for you on a personal note, would be there's more community, it's more popular, so there's obviously going to be more content and learning material on that side of things. So those are just kind of some differences between Azure and AWS. And then so like here I wanted to paint a picture because I have like a similar story. A realistic path for people without experience. A lot of people say like when you want to get started in IT, they recommend help desk. In my case, it was desktop support, so you're not like limited. It doesn't have to just be help desk, right? But here, for example, you get foundational Microsoft experience most of the time. So you'll learn stuff with like AD, Active Directory, as I mentioned earlier, You'll have exposure to like administrative work with like Office 365 or something like that. It all depends on who you work for and what you have access to. But aside from that, the next step up from help desk, a next like common, I would say easy one. I wouldn't say easy, so to speak, but like a common next step after help desk or desktop support would be a sysadmin. And with sysadmin, you have elevated access and more experience with Microsoft. And you can kind of see where I'm going here. If you're using Azure, now you are kind of like your next step is kind of like cloud engineer. I mean, there's so many different kinds of roles. This doesn't have to be the only one. But the next step up to cloud engineer would be slightly easier if you already have this experience and then you're like stacking Azure on top of it. And I'm not trying to be biased here. This is just quite literally, I'm just trying to help you out. Like, this is a realistic path. And it'd probably be easier to land something within Azure if you're looking at the infrastructure side of things, especially if you have Azure certs and you have Microsoft experience. So, who should choose what? I'd say you choose Azure or AWS if you already have experience with one of them, or you see more job listings for that provider in your area. Yeah, I mean, if you have like geographic flexibility, then that might not matter as much. But this right here is a good way to also decide which path to take. And I would choose multi-cloud if you're new to IT and you want maximum flexibility to apply broadly and figure out your path as you go. If your goal is to graduate faster, obviously, then you would want to choose multi-cloud because it's going to be easier. So obviously it's going to be faster. And that's pretty much it. Like, if you're still unsure, multi-cloud is usually the safest option. It opens the most doors and lets you specialize later based on real job experience. So again, like, regardless of which path you pick, you could theoretically pick the AWS path. You land an Azure job, and guess what? You can still take certs with Azure. It's just like you're trying to do what's the smartest for you and your budget, really. And most of the time, employers will pay for certificates anyway, but you have to have a job to do that and an employer that's willing to do it. But that's just something to keep in mind, right? So, speaking of keep in mind, so the next thing is, like, I don't think you should go much deeper than associate level certificate if you have no experience. And I kind of covered this earlier. Like, it just doesn't make sense to have a whole bunch of certs, especially specialized certs, if you have no hands-on stuff. Like, you're just theoretical, and you won't have a lot to talk about in like an interview if you've only done certs. Like, there's a lot more for you to talk about if you've done projects. So if you graduate faster, in theory, now you have extra time to work on you have extra time to work on projects. Versus the other way around, like, you're spending more time to graduate and you just have like specialized certs. So my recommendation, if you didn't already figure it out, is kind of just me saying multi-cloud, but let's go a little bit further in depth here. So some things to keep in mind is career aspirations. Where do you want to end up long term? Like, if you want to be a cloud engineer, if you want DevOps engineer or something like that, you need to keep that in mind, move forward accordingly. So, take your existing experience into account. If you've already worked with Intune, if you've already worked with Microsoft 365, if you've already done all this stuff, you have some Azure experience. So you can leverage that. Or maybe it's not Azure experience, but it's things that integrate with Azure very well, and a job that's hiring that uses that will obviously take you a little bit more seriously. And then the geographic opportunity and flexibility that I mentioned earlier, like, obviously if you can move, then you have a great advantage to like get jobs and search for jobs like everywhere. But if you're limited to where you stay, then you need to keep that into account, because that's like all you have to apply to. So this is a big help or a big hurt. So you just need to be aware before you start. So if your goal is to graduate ASAP, little decision tree here. If your goal is to graduate ASAP, multi-cloud. If not, and you are not new to IT, if you're new to IT, I always recommend multi-cloud, just because the depth of the AWS and Azure is just unnecessary, in my opinion, straight out of the gate. But if you already have experience in AWS Azure, then you might want to do the AWS track, so you can, or vice versa. If you either one, you might want to do the respective tracks So you have that specialized knowledge if you've already got experience, or maybe you've already got a position, you're just trying to get a little bit higher in the a higher role. But if you have no experience, I would say consider your career focus. If you really want to work in infrastructure, identity and access management, hybrid cloud, if that stuff kind of appeals to you, then the Azure track might be a way to go. Same thing with DevOps and automation, development. Maybe the AWS track's the way to go. But realistically, I mean, even if you take these into consideration, I would still do the multi-track. But again, this is mainly down to, you have IT experience. We're saying that you have IT experience. You don't have experience with AWS and Azure. Probably want to go with multi-cloud track anyway. But if you have a focus, or if there is a preference, you need to keep these things in mind to choose accordingly. But so I'll give you my story real quick, and it's really just that I chose WGU because I really wanted to make sure I got a job in cloud, and I figured, like, dude, if I have a degree in cloud and I have all this other experience, like, it's going to be hard to turn me down for a cloud role, especially if I have these certificates, a degree, and then other certificates that are not, cloud related. They all support my case. Like, surely nobody's going to turn me down. That was my idea. So I decided to go to WGU, and they just picked multi-cloud track for me, the foundational. They didn't even ask me. And then when I asked about it, they're like, whoa, well, I mean, you can still change if you want. And I was like, nah, we'll leave it as is, mainly because of the difficulty that I was concerned with. Because I was like, dude, if I'm stuck on one of these advanced certificates, it's going to take me longer to graduate, and I'm not going to be able to work on, like, projects that I want to within the time frame that I was considering. I hadn't even graduated yet, and I found, like, a position that wanted some Azure experience. It was a junior role, and I had already worked desktop support. I was currently working desktop support, and because I already gained so many certificates through the curriculum, I was already able to add those to my resume, and then because of that, I was able to use it, and I was actually a really good fit for that role. So I lucked out in the end. It was an Azure specific, infrastructure hybrid cloud setup. And yeah, that's kind of where I ended up. So I'm probably a little bit biased in this case, but I hope that you were able to take some kind of helpful information out of this, and maybe remove my bias as we went through this video together. But the whole point is really just to help you out here and help you decide. So these are just some things that I came up with. Make sure to leave your comments, any questions down in the comments, and I'll be sure to try to help you out and answer as I can.